Good morning, Baltimore, Annapolis, and wherever you find yourself this morning. My name is Delegate Stephanie Smith, Chair of the Baltimore City Delegation, bringing our Friday delegation meeting, the first of the 2021 session, to order. No gavel, but it still happened. So as was advertised, we will be entertaining an education briefing from our partners and friends with the Baltimore Teachers Union, as well as Baltimore City Schools. So, excuse me. So before we jump in, Jeremy, is there any bit of housekeeping on your end that you would like to lift up?
No, I think we're okay, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. I know that we probably will have a robust discussion and a lot of questions. So I'm going to just move up the small business portion of our hearing so that we can really, have more space for discussion for our two speakers. Crystal, I believe the first order of business was just to review the fact that there's going to be a couple of updates as it relates to some of our subcommittee work. So I wanted to give an opportunity for our alcohol subcommittee chairman, Delegate Clippinger, to kind of, set the table for folks.
Hello, thank you very much, Madam Chair. We are going to try to hear the alcohol-related bills in the subcommittee and then make our recommendations to the full delegation in enough time for those recommendations to make it to the Economic Matters Committee by February the 17th. It's going to be a little new. It's going to be a little different. It's going to probably, be a mess, but that's okay. We're going to try it. We have 3 bills scheduled for next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. We're working on the details regarding live streaming and other public access. So we'll continue to work that. We'll work with the chair to advertise that information quickly. If you have a bill that is alcohol related, you need to drop it as soon as possible. We will meet this coming Tuesday and the next Tuesday. We had not planned to meet the Tuesday after that because there probably wouldn't be enough time to get everything done that we need to get done to get the letters done. So if you have an alcohol bill, now's the time.
Thank you for that. It's nothing like talking about alcohol first thing in the morning. I hope it's not a foreboding sign for the rest of the delegation hearing. But thank you so much, good delegate. Delegate Learman, is there anything beyond what we're going to hear today on the education front that you would like to lift up?
Not today. I think thank you everybody for coming. There's important decisions being made about public schools. Many of us have kids. Or some of us have kids who are in our city public schools. So I'm glad that we have our speakers today. Thanks so much, Madam Chair, for helping for organizing this briefing. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I don't believe the chair of our Public Safety Committee is with us yet. We'll get back to Delegate Wells when she arrives, but I don't believe that she lifted up anything that she needed to share this morning, but I just wanted to recognize her role. With that being said, I just want to make sure people are muted whenever they're not speaking so that we don't have any feedback. And I'm also going to be, for BTU, for schools, I have your presentations. I will put them up. Just tell me, next slide, and I'll just keep it moving for you, okay? So that's how we'll handle that. After the presentations, I guess, Corey, would you be okay if people had questions along the way, or would you rather questions be held until you conclude your presentation?
I don't mind getting interrupted.
Okay, just want to
afterwards, whenever y'all want to jump in.
Okay, no problem. Just want to respect the flow to make sure you get everything in there. Okay, well, it sounds like we are in good shape to begin. So I just want to open up by saying, welcome to the 2021 session to all. I know this is a session unlike any other we've ever experienced. And I know that the conversation that we'll be having in the hearing, in the briefing we'll be hearing today is going to be of incredible importance to, so many. I know that Delegate Lehrman mentioned last March, some of our children came home for the last time, and it's been a very long time. And I just want to acknowledge that the teachers are doing on real job in some really challenging circumstances. I'm in first grade every other week, and I see it firsthand with my child, just the hard work that's being put in. And also just thank you to schools. I mean, this is just unprecedented, the challenges before all of us, parents, teachers, leaders, principals. It's just been an enormous challenge. And I just want to say that under a different federal leadership and under different, even maybe state leadership, the decisions that have been placed at the feet of school systems across this country, it's an unfair burden. Just to be frank, it's been an unfair burden because a lot of other decisions were forfeited or kicked down the road to put us in the moment that we're in. So I have great compassion for the difficulties all parties face. And with that being said, I want to give an opportunity for Corey Gaber, Executive Vice President, did I say that correctly? Of Baltimore Teachers Union. Is your title correct?
Vice President on the Baltimore Teachers Union Executive Board, of which there are many. It's not that fancy. Yeah.
I messed up there. I apologize for that. Vice President on the Executive Board of Baltimore Teachers Union. So I will pull up your presentation. Just give me a moment.
Sure.
Can you see the content?
Yes.
Okay, I'll make it bigger. Just a moment.
Great.
All right, can everyone see the content? Okay, please begin.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Corey Gaber. I am a middle school English teacher and a vice president on the Baltimore Teachers Union Executive Board. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to y'all today, to answer questions, and to share a lot of members' perspective of the staff directly in Baltimore City Public Schools right now. The prompt that we received and as part of the invitation was to focus on some of our concerns with the proposed reopening plan. So if this presentation feels negative, we are sharing specifically a response to those prompts. And we wanted to shout out at the beginning that, we know that City Schools is facing a tremendous challenge attempting to navigate a pandemic after decades of racist underfunding that does not allow them to properly execute the job, I know, the way they want to. And so there's a lot of people working heroically at North Avenue to do the best they can. Also want to shout out the fact that we have a really common legislative agenda this term in terms of overriding the veto, the Build to Learn Act, Delegate Learman's attempts to close the digital divide, and many other issues to make sure we get equitable funding. And so on all those pieces, we are on the same page. And on this particular proposed reopening plan, we do have strong differences. And so that's going to be the focus of my presentation today. Next slide. So one of our big concerns is that we feel like the public health data does not warrant a reopening right now. To the right, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, that's great. So on the right, you'll see the sort of decision-making tree that comes from state guidance that is also in City Schools health and safety guidance. And you'll notice there, you kind of start off looking at a couple different measures. One is the positivity rate. And if you are above 5%, you go to the right side of the tree. If you're below 5%, you go to the left side of the tree. The other thing that you look at once you get past that positivity rate is the case rate per 100,000 over the last week in Baltimore City. And depending on where that case rate lies, there's a series of recommendations of what makes the most sense in terms of in-person learning activities. So you can go to the next slide. And so starting with our positivity rate, it's above that threshold. We're at 5.6%. Really thankful that it's actually down from where it's been the past couple of weeks, but still above the 5% threshold as of 120 when I put this together. Next slide. And then when you look at the case rate, on the right side of the tree, you saw at the far end was 15 cases or greater per 100K, and you should have limited or no in-person programming. Right now, we're at 38.2, so more than double that 15 case rate threshold. And so again, just going on City Schools and the state's own guidance, we should have limited or no in-person programming, much less expanding in-person programming. So the public health data there on those two measures are major concerns for Baltimore Teachers Union members. Next slide. Yep. So again, just reiterating, if we're at 38.2 and above 15 should be limited or no in-person programs, we just think it doesn't make sense right now to expand. It's going against the public health data that we said we are going to pay attention to. Next slide. Another piece of data that I think is really important is when you go to the CDC's first core indicator and threshold for risk of introduction and transmission of COVID-19 in schools is number of cases per 100K over the past 2 weeks. And you'll see they have 5 different categories there, from lowest risk of transmission in schools to highest risk of transmission in schools when you're at 200 or above. Next slide. And you'll see that as of January 10th, there's a bit of a lag in the data, as you know, because it takes a while to get the exact numbers from the city health department. You don't have the exact number of cases on the day. So anyhow, as of 110, we're at about 585, right? The threshold to get into the highest risk category is 200. We're at 585, almost triple that threshold. So again, when we see data like that, and we are in the highest risk of transmission category in schools and far above that level, again, that tells us it is not time to expand in-person programming. Next slide. Additionally, we've seen a lot of new data come out recently saying that, even folks like the Johns Hopkins epidemiologist who recently published an op-ed in the Washington Post, and they are advocating for reopening, but even within that article, they concede that schools almost certainly do contribute to viral transmission, and pretending they don't is potentially dangerous. So this part feels, there's consensus here. It absolutely makes a difference in terms of transmission rates. And the chart to your right comes from a recent study in Florida where, we're able to do some more apples to apples comparisons of schools that stayed remote versus people who participated in physical in-person learning. And you'll see even amongst the young people, you are seeing an increase in the case rates for the folks who are doing physical in-person learning compared to folks doing remote learning. Next slide. Meanwhile, around the country, like in Massachusetts, where there has been a recent reopening, even in a single week period, there were 523 students and 407 staffers that tested positive for COVID in Massachusetts schools just in the past week. So again, we have cautionary tales around the country of what happens if you reopen and expand in-person programming too soon before the public health data warrants it. Next slide. Part of the memorandum of understanding that the Baltimore Teachers Union negotiated with city schools lays out a particular provision that says if there is a positive case that's identified of a BTU member or a student who was physically present in a building, then city schools, once their case is confirmed, will communicate that to Baltimore Teachers Union. And we have been maintaining a spreadsheet of all those cases that have been reported to us. So again, this does not include non-staff members, people who work at a charter school who are employed by the foundation. This does not include cases that are rumored to be heard but have not been confirmed by city schools themselves. And even just on those more narrow categories, we have 80 positive cases so far. And that is over 80 positive cases so far that have been reported to us. And that's with only about 2% of students being back in buildings for in-person learning. So if we were to expand in-person learning dramatically right now, we would expect a similar rise in positive cases beyond the many we already have right now. And one more quick note about this, you may also have heard some data points about there being 0 or 1 transmission case in city schools. The difference between those numbers is, again, we are sharing positive cases that have been confirmed by city schools to us of BTU members and students who've been physically present in buildings. The 0 or 1 number you may have heard has to do with cases where you can confirm that the transmission occurred in city schools, right? And that is an extremely high bar to be able to prove with certainty that the place where you got COVID was in city schools, as opposed to, well, maybe you got it from the grocery store, earlier that morning. And so it's an unbelievably high bar, and why you may hear 0 or 1. But what we do know is that there are people in city schools who've been tested positive, over 80 that have been confirmed already, just with 2% back in buildings. Next slide. Meanwhile, in Europe, where they reopened schools and then the new variant hit, they have shut down their schools again in concern for the public health data, in particular, the consequences of the new variant, which is shown to be, more deadly in a variety of ways, and students and young people seem more susceptible to it than the older variant. Next slide. Another major concern that Baltimore Teachers Union has is ventilation work that isn't yet complete. Next slide. So remember, keep in mind, again, like this is not some mismanagement or fraud from city schools, right? This is literally having decades of work not being done on your facilities that needed to be done, that was essential work that you literally do not have the funds to address. And so even before the pandemic, there was a $3 billion backlog with a B of essential facilities maintenance work that needed to be done but couldn't. Again, not their fault, but it is the reality that we have inherited. Next slide. And so, City Schools has provided an update, and this is from December 4th, and I know that they are providing a new update soon. So this will likely have more facilities where work has been completed. But as of that time, only about 26% of elementary and elementary middle schools have actually completed their ventilation upgrade work with the MERV 13 filters, with the air purifiers that have been purchased. And so what's very alarming to a lot of members is saying, listen, let's get that work done first before we're putting people back in buildings. And where there's sometimes a lack of trust is the idea that, well, we can't just go on folks' word. We want the work to be confirmed that it's done, because we know that there have been people back in buildings already, students and staff, where the work was not yet completed, right? So if we're already willing to put people back into buildings where the ventilation work was not done, that does not inspire trust and confidence that folks will say, okay, well, the buildings will be safe moving forward. Next slide. Yep, I just said all that. Next slide. And so, even if you get the filters, even if you get the air purifiers in there, it's a bit more complicated in terms of what's going to make a safe learning and working environment. Because that does not address air changes per hour, which we know is a crucial aspect of healthy ventilation. We know in hospitals, which obviously will have a higher standard they need to meet, but that is one of the main measures that hospitals look at to ensure that the air quality is where it needs to be. And even our 21st century buildings, my wife teaches in one that's opening at Medfield Heights, and it's gorgeous. But even in those buildings, you can't actually open the windows. And so again, you're not getting necessarily a lot of fresh airflow in there. So in addition to having this work completed, members are really looking to be able to see, can we monitor the humidity levels? Can we monitor the CO2 levels that would be in line with ASHRAE guidance? Next slide. And this is something that if you look at our neighbors in Boston, where the union and city and their district reached a reopening agreement, they have installed data loggers that provide daily air quality measures in the schools. And so something that Baltimore Teachers Union would like to see is a more rigorous and transparent and ongoing measure of air quality and safety, as opposed to the baseline right now is just that there will be a weekly walkthrough of buildings to see if the air quality is where it needs to be and that we're meeting standards, but how exactly that is reported and what specific measures are being reported and how and to who, those are pieces that, again, we'd like to see more rigorous and transparent measures being shared with the public. Next slide. Transportation is another big concern for us because a lot of the planning is based on having really thoughtful principals create different cohorts into schools that will not interact and cross over with each other so that you can maintain that cohort integrity. And then if there does happen to be a positive case, you can kind of, conceal and limit the damage. Next slide. Problem is, pre-pandemic, 20 to 25,000 students utilize MTA to get to school, right? And when we expand in-person learning, the amount of people using the bus will skyrocket. And you have to remember, in Baltimore City schools, people don't just go to their local neighborhood school a couple blocks away. We have a portfolio and choice system here, which means many students travel over an hour across multiple bus stops in order to get to school in the first place. And unlike in our, our yellow buses, we cannot effectively enforce social distancing and mask wearing on the bus. I'm not sure how many folks here have recently ridden the bus in the city. There are great intentions, there are great people working there, but the reality is, like, you are not getting pure social distancing and mask wearing on MTA buses. And so the problem then is you have a significant breakdown of cohort integrity before students even arrive in the building, because of all the different folks they're interacting with across the city before they even walk through the school doors. Next slide. And then obviously vaccinations is like the hot topic right now. And we'd love to see a larger effort to getting these done faster. Next slide. So, in city schools, again, they have legitimately worked really hard to create a new partnership with Johns Hopkins University that will be vaccinating up to 500 people per week. The problem is staff are being mandated to return regardless of where they are in the vaccination process. We've also heard early signs that the rollout of this and the sign up has been very disorganized, and we've had a lot of emails from members who've gone to actually get their vaccine, and it has taken hours, whereas in other facilities around the state, it's a more quick in and out efficient process. And if you compare that to elsewhere in Maryland, at the Education Health Senate committee hearing yesterday or the day before, PG County said they're going to be vaccinating 1,200 staff per day, 1,200 per day as opposed to 500 per week, and that they're choosing not to reopen until the spring once folks have been vaccinated and it's safe. Talbot County, by comparison, has already vaccinated 60% of staff, and 100% of staff who has volunteered to get vaccinated will at least have their first dose by next week. Meanwhile, Harford County is not returning until meeting public health metrics rather than setting a date regardless of the data. So again, you see a large contrast here, and our members are very interested in why other systems were able to get these vaccinations so much faster and done so much quicker, and are wondering what we can do to get these same rates of vaccination at the same speeds that we're seeing elsewhere around the state, as well as seeing, again, decisions being based on the public health data as opposed to just picking a date regardless of the health data. Next slide. And, by choosing this sort of reopening plan where staff are going to be mandated to be back in buildings mid-vaccination process, we're going to be voluntarily creating a really chaotic staffing crisis. And that's because, again, for very legitimate public health safety reasons, we say that if you are experiencing COVID-like symptoms and you're ill, you are supposed to don't go into the school building, right? Isolate for 10 days, get a test to see if you're positive or not, and then you can go back, right? The ill person should stay home at least 10 days. So that's what the health and safety guidelines say. Next slide. But if you look at the vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, especially after the second dose, you are expected to experience COVID-like symptoms, including fever, chills, tiredness, headaches, which match the symptoms on the health and safety guidelines. And so for staff, that means if I'm getting vaccinated and I'm following the health and safety guidelines and I experience symptoms which are likely, you're going to have waves of people calling out just by necessity of following the guidelines, which then create a real chaotic and inconsistent crisis for daily in-school learning, where I've been depending on this in-person teacher. Now they're going to be back home for 10 days. And that's happening with a lot of people all at once. So we think we are choosing a chaotic rollout, and we don't have to go in that direction. Next slide. And so if not that, then what? Next slide. BTU's stance is that we should have staff fully vaccinated. And when we say fully vaccinated, we mean both doses and the waiting period so that it has reached full efficacy before mandating those staff to go back in. The ventilation work being completed and verified before any students or staff are brought back in. Again, having some minimum public health thresholds that are met for at least a week before folks are sent back in, because it's not just about, staff feelings of comfort. It's about maintaining the health of our entire city. And even if folks are vaccinated, you can still be an asymptomatic carrier. The research is still out there. And as our students will not be vaccinated, we are potentially still exacerbating this crisis. And then investing in improved virtual learning. Since even if we move forward with the plan as is, you're going to have potentially the majority of families still doing virtual learning. And so we need to continue to invest to try to make that better for the people choosing that option. Next slide.
Mr. Gaber, we have
Yes.
one question right now.
Sure.
Delegate McIntosh.
You can finish. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay,
Oh, no worries. Okay.
finish.
Cool.
Continue, Mr.
He's
Gaber.
on a roll. He's on a roll.
Thank you. I'll be like one more minute. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so two other things that are really important that we're hearing from our members is simultaneous teaching, where I am responsible for students in person and at the same time responsible for students virtually, is not an effective way to teach and learn. What happens is you end up getting an inferior product for both. If I am in person, all of a sudden I am wearing a mask, which makes it more difficult to understand. The students in person are wearing masks and they are distant. It's not like they suddenly, if they come to school, they're getting pre-pandemic learning, right? By maintaining our health, it's not the same. You are isolated. You can't do the same sort of communal activities. And your teacher is not just paying attention to you. They have to be live streaming via computer with a mask on and typing and paying attention to the people on the computer at the same time. And so the virtual students aren't getting the same level of attention. And the students in person are not getting the same in-person experience that would actually close achievement gaps. And finally, we think if we were to move forward with our plan, then as staff become fully vaccinated, you start bringing back small groups, not just whoever signs up, but having it be equitable by targeting the hardest to reach students who've not been engaging, students who've been failing, special education students, English language learners, and bringing those students in first as the folks who need that just in-person learning the most, as opposed to everybody can come back in, whatever parent signs up. Next slide. And so, we are in agreement with City Councilman Cohen, Burnett, and Dorsey, who've written a public letter saying that they agree with the more phased in and safer approach, as well as, next slide, school board member Darrell Brooks, who points out that, equity also means looking at the public health data and the people who are going to be most impacted by the pandemic and COVID in the first place, and prioritizing, life over learning. So last slide. We think that we're at, a turning point. The health commissioner recently said she's cautiously optimistic that we've reached a tipping point. And we think we are at this moment where, because we have these vaccines, if we take our time right now and not push people back into the buildings when it still is unsafe, we can finally get ahead of this virus and get the city to return to normalcy. If we rush back now, we are potentially exacerbating the entire crisis that we are trying to avoid and solve in the first place. So that's why we are urging a different path forward. Thank you for your time.
Madam Chair?
Yes, please go
Thank
ahead.
you. And Corey, really, thank you for your presentation. I want to commend you on not making this.
I'm sorry, I can't hear right now. Delegate McIntosh, are you speaking? Maybe
I
it's just
am.
me.
Can everybody hear me?
Oh, crap. Okay. One moment.
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can hear you.
I'll just talk about Corey behind his back. How's that? Let's see if Corey can get it. Can you hear Corey? I think it's Corey that can't hear me. Let me just say for the delegation, because we don't want to hold things up. One, I really appreciate his.
I'm sorry, I still cannot hear anything. Oh, it was working so well the whole time. Apologies, I'm going to keep trying to fix this on my end.
All right, and I'm going to keep talking. I do appreciate Corey's approach to this because, one, he acknowledges it's not teachers versus administration, that the problems that we face in our schools are systemic and decades old, and in particular the state of the buildings. But and and I do want to say that it brings, all of these issues to fore. I was in a conversation just a day or two ago and inquired about where we are in air conditioning units so that we can have summer learning and get learning loss made up in our schools. And there was good news there. But I just want to say that I think while we can focus on so many of the larger problems, we need to focus also on the problem of learning loss with our kids. I think that's the area that all of us ought to join together and try to address. So there's no right or wrong here. Corey mentioned Boston and what they've done. Well, the city invested $730 million. $730 million. And our city invests a year 19. So, do we get mad at the city now? No. I mean, the city has budget issues just like the school does. Should we then get mad at the state? Yeah, I think we should. I don't think we get the capital money we should get from the state. But to resolve all of these $3 billion worth of problems and all of the problems that were just stated isn't going to happen in time to get our kids back in the classroom. So I just want to say, Corey, I appreciate the way you presented this. I do. But I think we need to hone it back down to what needs to happen, boom, 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 to get our kids back in the classroom. Because learning loss with the blueprint, which will go into effect, is something we don't want to have Baltimore City kids fall behind further in compared to the rest of the state. And the reason, they're getting fewer vaccines compared to Prince George's County, I mean, that's something I've been talking to the city health department about. I don't know why we are rolling out so much slower than other counties in the state. But I've got a meeting later today about that too. So, this isn't all about the school system. It's about a school system within a city that is poor, within a state that isn't poor, and with, as you recognize, long-term, decades-old structural racism that has been at play in our funding formulas. So, Corey, thank you. But I'm going to ask everybody, particularly you, when I talk to you through this session, let's hone it down to the essentials about getting kids back in school. Because all your other points are valid. We just can't solve them all this year or next year or the year after. It'll take time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do any other delegates have any questions? Delegate Conaway?
Thank you and good morning, and thank you, Chair. My question is in reference to the data loggers. Is there any idea how much these data loggers cost, and are they Wi-Fi, driven, or they report by Wi-Fi? And is it done on a daily basis? How does that work?
I can't give you too much details on that, but I would be happy to reach out and get that data for you. I do know that one of the primary things they use with the CO2 trackers are approximately $80 to $120 per unit, and that it is monitored and connected to the Wi-Fi, so that they are getting live updates and daily updates in Boston.
Did you have any follow-up, Delegate Conaway?
No, thank you very much.
Okay, just want to make sure I didn't miss anything on mute.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from delegates? Okay, I want to thank you so much for your time, Mr. Gaber. And I just want to let you know that we have shared the slides with the delegation so people can review. It's full of a lot of data and a lot of information. So we just want to make sure that people could spend time with it and can follow up with you, afterwards, should they have any additional questions. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
You too. And at this time, we'll be hearing from Baltimore City School CEO, Dr. Sonja Santelises. So I will be pulling up your presentation as you prepare. Just a moment. Can people see my screen? Yes, okay.
Great. So it's okay for me to go, Delegate? Great. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you for having me here today. I do want to reiterate what Mr. Gaber said earlier, that there are a number of points that we do have agreement on. We have some disagreement with BTU, but we continue to meet weekly. On a weekly basis and to discuss. And I will just say that with regards to a lot of the feedback in our continued rollout of in-person learning opportunities, teachers, principals, school leaders on the ground doing the work continue to be some of our best sources of information. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity today. What you have before you is really a timeline of how from the beginning, as soon as we could, I won't say back March 2020, but as early as summer 2020, we recognized, based on feedback from families, based on what we had heard about a number of students' learning experiences virtually, that while some were in fact thriving, many were not. So as early as summer 2020, Baltimore City Schools began small group in-person learning opportunities. And our approach has been slow and steady. We have learned from those learning opportunities, from the teachers, the principals, workers on the ground. So you'll see as early as summer 2020, we had very small groups in. Then we moved to student learning centers that many of you may remember late September. And these were learning centers in response to the large number of families who we heard from who just needed an in-person option. Families, many frontline workers who needed a place. And so our SLCs really began to generate a lot of the information we have about our safety and health protocols. Then in November, as Mr. Gaber referenced, throughout this time, we have been as city schools prioritizing our students of greatest need. So you'll see here, we began with separate public day schools, pre-K and K students and specialized programs, began November 9th. And then later in November, we had additional traditional and charter schools that also came on board with regards to, again, targeting the prioritized student groups that you see here. And so the proposal to begin additional expansion of in-person learning opportunities now in February really comes from a trajectory of learning that we have had beginning last summer. And so as we move forward, and we can move to the next slide, Delegate, thank you. There we go, thank you. So I think one of the things that's really important to keep in mind here is something that Delegate McIntosh referenced, and that is the fact that we know that we have large numbers of young people who really desperately need in-person learning support. There are not only numbers, but letters, emails I've received from families, young people themselves, who have texted and said, basically, let me know when school is back open because I'm out. I can't do this virtual anymore. We know that, for example, a number of our students with disabilities regressed during this time. And so we have prioritized continually this need to make sure that we have options for our families. This is not about forcing families to choose to be back in buildings, but to provide students and families who want that in-person option that opportunity. You'll see our 3 phases. Again, continuing a phasing in. So we'll begin with kindergarten through grade 2, beginning February 16th. Then 2 weeks later, grades 3 through 5, beginning Monday, March 1st. And then grades 9 and 12, beginning Monday, March 1st as well. We do know that high school's a bit more complex and complicated, so we wanted to give more time for that. And again, I think what's important to emphasize is families will continue to have a choice to remain virtual if they choose. Thank you. Next slide. So again, this question about why adding more classrooms now, and I think there's 3 major points here. We know from our achievement levels, attendance rates, we know, for example, I was talking to some of Chief Ham's team. We know that we're tracking more interest in suicide through some of our technical tracking devices, that there's far more, inquiries from young people about suicide. We know that there is
Just a moment, Dr. Santelises. I believe someone is aggressively typing or doing something and they're not on mute. So please get on mute. I think I found them. Okay, I'm trying to mute them myself. Delegate Boyce, could you mute? Thank you. I'm trying to see if there's anyone else I'm missing. Okay, continue, Dr. Santelises.
No, thank you, Delegate. So that really is the driving force in terms of why we believe this expansion is needed now. With regard to vaccine access, we do know, and we have some good news around where we are. I think the typing's begun again, but I'll just keep going. The vaccine access, we are increasing on-site testing and in-person sites. We know that there have been challenges through the city, but through a number of our partnerships, we're actually seeing a great uptick, which I'll talk about a little later. And then you'll see that we have actually gone beyond CDC guidelines, and we're in the process of installing over 8,000 air purifiers, upgrading air filters.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Santelises. Delegate Boyce, please mute. I'm unable to mute you. Okay, continue, Dr. Santelises.
Okay.
Oh, good grief.
Okay. Do you want me to just continue? Okay. So with regards to the investment in terms of air purifiers, upgrading filters, we have heard from families and from staff that knowing the progress of that installation is important. And so we will have that data available regularly via a new dashboard that will be launched the beginning of February. And our small classroom and limited options are in line with state health metrics guidance. And I will say that I received a briefing this morning on a 7:30, 8 o'clock call with the state health department in line with some of the changes in the state health metrics guidance that are coming based on what we now know about the virus that we did not know a year ago. And so we are in line with that guidance since September. I do think it's important to note that we had one transmission event, which means an in-school transmission. And I would actually say that we work with the Baltimore City Health Department, and we mirror in city schools what they are seeing across the city. And that is with the correct mitigation efforts in place. And again, Baltimore City Health Department is signed on. What they are seeing is that actually the spread is occurring outside of spaces like schools or health offices, because that's where the mitigation is properly in place. Where a lot of the transmission is happening in kind of community activity. So what this signals to us is that our mitigation efforts up until now, we have been, since the summer, we were one of the first school districts that had real rigorous health measures operational on the ground. And we believe, again, that this track record puts us in a very strong position for expanded opening. And I will continue. Thank you. Next slide, Delegate. Much appreciated. A couple of just quick slides about where we are with our young people. And again, I think for us, the focus is on who is a school system we are charged to serve, and that is students. So what you'll see here is that even within our own data, we are seeing 20+ % increases in the number of students who have failed one or more courses in the first quarter. We will be tracking this data throughout the year and reporting that out. But this says to us that there absolutely has been an impact for young people for whom virtual learning is not working. And we can move to the next slide as well. You'll see some of this, and I think it's important to know part of why we focus on ninth grade here on this slide quickly is just that what we know from the research from UChicago Consortium is that this is not one isolated moment in time. This is not something that is easily recoverable, because we know that first-time ninth graders who have what we call these course flag failures, right? So one failure or a overall GPA of less than 2.0 are significantly less likely. So it's not easy to make up. I know that some folks think it is, but the research is not pointing to the fact, or does point to the fact that ninth graders who experience great failure in ninth grade are far less likely to graduate from high school and far less likely to graduate ready for post-secondary work or post-secondary study. And we can go, Delegate, through those next slides. You'll see high school student GPAs are falling on this slide. Now, these are the percentage of students with GPAs below a 1.0. And I want to add here that we actually have been doing far more targeted outreach. We have Wednesday counseling days, asynchronous days that provide for more small group. And even with that, we're seeing large increases in high school GPAs falling. Next slide. You'll see here K through 5, some of our beginning of year reading assessment. This is an area where we began to see growing progress over the last few years based on our literacy focus that, again, was still insufficient, but we were seeing increases. You'll see now that particularly at kindergarten level, we are seeing a heavy fall off from that, the past trends of increased achievement. And we know that our Black and Latinx students are experiencing even more learning loss in these areas in grades K2 through 2. Next slide, Delegate, thank you. With regards to the social emotional impact, when schools reopen, and I think we would all agree with regards to recovery, many students are still going to be recovering from the pandemic, the trauma, the grief, the anxiety. I spoke to a mother yesterday who told me their child now is in counseling because they have been home so long. The virtual learning is not working for them. And so there is a social emotional impact. Again, this is not for every student. I also get emails from families who say, frankly, the distance learning is working for us. It's working better for my child. And so they will continue to have that option. This is about making sure that we get our young people what they need based on what we are seeing, the trends we are seeing. We know we've been emphasizing the teachers are really, when we reopen, in some of the places we have reopened, teachers are really focusing on those relationships first. And so part of what we are trying to do is get ahead for some of our students who have felt the impact the greatest. Next slide, please. So our planning for second semester in-person learning, just want to point out that one, we have learned from experience of other school districts with similar demographics to Baltimore City that are reopening. Frankly, some have opened far earlier than we have because we have taken a gradual approach. We have learned from other school districts how to make sure that our mitigation procedures are working actual learning experience will be. I want to point out that the health commissioner and the health advisory committee have worked with us to look at a variety of factors, a variety of measures to make sound decisions and recommendations. And we have been following those recommendations. So, for example, we did roll back in November the number of schools where we started based on recommendations from those groups, and we will continue to do that. You should also know that what continues to be our best source of feedback are the teachers, the principals, the staff who have been on the ground. I got an email from a principal yesterday who has been in person since November, who said she actually is enjoying the leadership opportunity to really be able to meet with her colleagues to prepare well, safely, and intentionally for the return of students who will be coming. And then you'll see that we continue to plan, as I referenced earlier, and to get feedback from a variety of organizations, from Piazza, the Teacher Advisory Council, BTU, and PCAP. Next slide, please. Trying to track my time. What you'll see here is, again, a review of what the options will be. I will just point out two things. One, that charter and contract schools will have the option of how to offer in-person learning to families. We have a number of charters who are on a similar timeline, related, perhaps not exact, and that we will be making an announcement again in March about remaining grades, as we too will follow some of the health data. Next slide, please. I think it's important to note here on the in-person calendar that based on feedback from teachers, one of the things that you'll see we've implemented is half day for the week of February 8th prior to any arrival of school. And part of the reason for this is because we know, I've talked to teachers, it is scary returning back to a building where you have not been for a long time. And that is natural, we understand that. And so part of why we have marked out that week as half days asynchronous is because we want to give teachers time to get back in their classroom, verify for themselves that all of the safety precautions are in place, and it gives us time to flag any remaining concerns that might be in question, as well as to plan for the type of learning model, hybrid learning model, that their school will be implementing. Next slide. With regards to vaccine and testing, one of the things that I think is really important to know is that the vaccinations that we announced with Johns Hopkins, we are very excited about, because these are in addition to the spaces that are available as just the city at large. So we did have some educators who registered through the city. And then when those closed, we were really, in terms of not the availability, we were really excited to partner with Johns Hopkins initially around this additional vaccination. I will also let you know today that the University of Maryland Medical System is also partnering with us on vaccinations. You'll see some of the data when the slide was put together. I have updated data now that we have nearly 3,500 employees with Baltimore City Schools that have received invitations to be vaccinated. We have 1,200 of those 3,500 that have responded that they want it, and those vaccinations have begun this week and will continue, and we should be able to get through most of that 1,200 next week. So the pace and the increase of the vaccinations that we have sought, we've been proactive in looking for partnerships. We've been working with Mayor Scott, who has been very supportive of the vaccination efforts. And so we actually, with 3,500 employees receiving invitations to date, we actually are, given some of the other challenges that I think we all know about, we actually are doing in some ways better than one would expect, given some of the challenges with vaccinations. Next slide, please. Just want to point out that the CDC has identified 5 key mitigation strategies. We know that this virus is going to be with us for the foreseeable future, but what we also know is that the 5 mitigation strategies that the CDC has outlined actually do mitigate the spread of the virus. We have implemented, we have had endorsement by both the health department as well as our medical advisory board for the mitigation strategies that have been in place. And we have gone above these mitigation strategies beyond, because we are prioritizing keeping staff and students safe. Next slide, please. So air purification and ventilation has obviously been great focus on. With regards to the backlog nationwide of the ordering of air purification, our team has, under Dr. Washington's leadership, has done a fabulous job in securing purifiers at a time where, frankly, they are very hard to come by. So we have about 8,000 air purifiers on order. We projected the grade level returns and the classrooms based on, frankly, how many we knew we would have in place and be able to install and put in place for the return of school. So again, some of what is driving the numbers of classrooms that we're opening up is directly related to what we know that we can deliver for families. The other piece I just want to say here is that with regards to the backlog, I think it is important to know that on the backlog, it doesn't mean that the buildings don't work. It means that we're spending lots of time fixing and refixing issues. So one of the things we've said very clearly, if the system does not work, then the building closes. And so part of what we have been working on is, again, going beyond just, can you open a window? The installation, the air purification we've invested in is hospital grade purification. We have made sure that we invested in this, frankly, in ways that other school districts have not, because we want to keep our families and our staff safe. You'll see here that the dashboard I referenced earlier will allow the public to be able to chart where classrooms are with regard to purification, with regard to air filters, so that, again, the public will know our progress as we approach each phase of reopening. Next slide, please. This is just a draft of what that dashboard will look like. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the state guidance and metrics, one of the things from the very beginning that the state of Maryland has directed and guided is that we should make sure that we are consulting with our local health department. And so we have been doing that. We have been implementing the mitigation strategies. I would argue that actually what we have heard from not just our own medical health advisory group, not only what we have heard from Commissioner DeRosa, is that the in-school transmission rate actually is a robust indicator of the effectiveness of the mitigation strategies. That with regards to a high bar, and I would just respectfully disagree, because based on what the health commissioner has actually communicated with us directly, that actually with regards to transmission, we actually do see that there is a difference when those mitigation strategies are in place. We do know, for example, that with regards to transmission, that if an individual who works at one of our in-person sites has COVID and gives it to another individual who is in close contact at that site, that person contracts it during the time that they were contagious. We know this because we do the contact tracing, and we do the contact tracing in collaboration with the Baltimore Health Department. So they are verifying our contact tracing protocols, and it actually is a strong indicator, one that we've seen across the country. I think the other piece with regards to the metrics, and part of why the opening was, we announced it 4 to 5 weeks away, is what I think is also important to know is that we too are monitoring. We too are monitoring with the health department. It is why we made adjustments in the fall. We know that with this virus, we're going to have to continue to make adjustments. The other piece, though, that we do know is that there have been other states, other school districts with metrics that are 3 to 4 times what we are seeing. They're not even close to the 5.6, let alone 5. And they are successfully opening with very low rates of transmission. We know that this is a choice that families are going to have to make. And the thrust of this reopening is to provide families a choice. It is not to say everyone has to come back. But what we know is that Black and brown parents across the country are less likely to have in-person choices for their young people. They are less likely to be able to, particularly in some of our neighborhoods and in some zip codes across the city, are unable to say, virtual is not working for my child. I want to pick up and do private school or parochial school until this passes over. They are unable to just, quit their job and homeschool. They don't have those options. And so what we are seeing is that our families from all neighborhoods, from all zip codes, want equitable options. And so that's why we are making sure that we're monitoring the metrics. We are keeping in line with the guidance that's been given from the state, but we are also monitoring what our Health Advisory Council is saying, as well as the Health Commissioner is saying. Next slide, please. This is just an overview for staff and family engagement so that we've had 2 town halls this week. School level, I've heard work from a number of principals who have had information sessions for their families and are getting feedback. We have some schools where they already know 30% of their families, 35% want the option. Some, it's only 17 or 18. I think what we have seen over the course of the last year is that once we demonstrate to families that we can bring back students safely, once they see the mitigation efforts in place, once they see what the routines look like, they have increased confidence that we are able to provide them with a safe option. So our parent engagement, our family engagement, I had a PCAB session as well yesterday. And so just want to let the delegation know that we will be offering more small in-person opportunities for families to ask questions, orientation as a parent. I received notification, even though I have 6th graders and they don't get to go back yet. I received notification from our child's school and many others about the reopening, the reorientation. And the other piece that we are seeing is that staff need time to plan together. Staff need time to be able to, again, ensure that the protocols are in place. And I think that's the last slide. You can tell me, Delegate. Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to track my time. I'm sure I went over. My apologies, but I will turn over back to you.
Thank you so much. Oh, there's a little echo. Hold on. Yeah, if you mute, we should be good. Okay, great. So thank you for that presentation. I feel like I might have one other person unmuted. Can you double check? Okay, well, the next person to ask a question will be Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Santelises. My questions, 2 questions for you. What is the potential impact of the governor's press conference yesterday on the city school system? And what additional COVID-related resources, that is funding, do you need from the state?
Well, that's a great question, Delegate Rosenberg. What I hopeful is that we will have additional support, for reopening. I will say as I think everyone on this call can agree, with regards to the past investment in city school buildings, that's what's led us to have to purchase millions of dollars worth of air purifiers, right? Because the ventilation systems are not up to par. So we have spent money that other school districts, frankly, have not. So part of what I'm very hopeful of is that as we continue to demonstrate a trajectory of safe opening, at least based on the bid I know from, because to be very honest, I had a doctor's appointment during the governor's press conference. That might not be a good thing to say. So I didn't actually follow the entire press conference, but from what I have heard, that perhaps there is additional funding to support, again, those of us who have had to invest more. We had to invest in air purifiers, and I know other school districts did not, but we did it to keep our staff, to keep our families safe. So that's what we're hopeful.
Thank you. Delegate Conaway, you had a question about
Yes,
transportation?
thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Santelises. So we're going to get a copy of your slide.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What percentage of the students use the MTA to get to school?
It's actually Dr. Washington is here. Dr. Washington, can you just confirm for me? It's primarily our secondary students, our high school students use the MTA, correct, Dr. Washington? Can you give us the precise percentage for me, please?
So I would have to calculate the percentage, but 29,000 of our students use MTA.
Thank you. And though Delegate Lewis posed a question in chat, I still think it's important for everyone to hear the answer that is also listening in the public. So Delegate Lewis, would you mind asking again?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Good to see everyone. I'm always interested in scale and percentages and magnitude. And Dr. Santelises, you provided a number of teachers that are signed up that are registered to be vaccinated. And you said that number is 1,078 teachers registered to get vaccinated. I want to know how that compares to the total number of teachers. And Ms. Perkins-Cohen's did answer in the chat, but if you could talk about that a little bit, thank you. Can't hear you, Dr. Santelises.
Thank you. I think, yes, the ongoing T-shirt that I should have that says you're on mute and a little reminder button. So I think one of the things that's important, Delegate, first to note is that we have about 10,000 total staff in the system, which is what Chief Perkins-Cohen put in the chat. And so when I'm referencing numbers, it's numbers of staff. And so one of the things we did was we prioritized staff who are already in buildings first for the vaccine. So that number of the, and actually there's the number on the slide, but also the number that I added this morning, which is updated because literally almost every hour we get more requests and more steps. So of the 3,500 employees that have received invitations for vaccinations, and I think that's important because we are not mandating vaccinations. So this idea that we have to wait until everybody is vaccinated, not everybody is taking the vaccine. Not everybody wants to take the vaccine. And there are a variety of reasons, for another gathering that we can talk about that. And we are going to be continuing work with our medical community around that. But that 10,000 staff includes custodians, food service workers, those folks we prioritize because they have already been out front. They never had the choice of being virtual. They have been out since March. And so we prioritize those. We prioritize principals and teachers who have been back in buildings. I think one of the things that's important to know is that if we've got about 4,000 folks, 4,000 staff who will need to be in person beginning February 16th, right? That's the first group that we're targeting to get through, right? So that group we are targeting and prioritizing because we know that they're due back on February 16th. Then we have another 1 to 2,000 who will return March 1st. They are next in line. So part of what the staggering does on reentry is allows us to focus on target populations of staff, teachers, principals, and others who will be back actually in school in that phase. So the fact that we have 3,500 employees who've received an invitation to be vaccinated, we are really working to correlate that with folks' time of reentry. Now, there may be other teachers. I've heard from teachers that teach 7th grade who got an appointment through the city site. That's separate. And in addition, in a good way, to what we are tracking as city schools through the University of Maryland and through Johns Hopkins. So part of why we have done the staggering is to help help with really accelerating. And I think that's another point that we all agree on, that the acceleration of the vaccine and offering that for staff who want it is an important development. So does that help answer your question or no?
Yes, that helps. That does help. Thank you. But you did raise a couple more questions, if I may, Madam Chair. So what's really, it's great to know a little bit more about your plan to roll out vaccine for school staff. And I appreciate staff means everyone working in the school system. Get it. What's important, though, from the public health perspective is to achieve a level of vaccine coverage, or that is to say a percentage of at-risk individuals who've been vaccinated. It's important to achieve a level of coverage that's meaningful, that will protect everyone. And we know that level of vaccine coverage is about 75%. So I'd be interested to know at some point, given your staggered restaffing plan, at each level of staggering, say for February 16th, what percentage of staff are vaccinated? And then again, for that March 1st group, what percentage are vaccinated? Because it's not enough to, and I know you know this, Dr. Santelises, but it would be informative for us to know at each level of return, what level of vaccine coverage have we achieved? Thank you.
Sure. And we can definitely work on getting you that, Delegate. And I would also say it's why successfully implementing the other mitigation procedures and practices has been important, because what has also been made very clear is that getting the vaccine does not mean everything goes back to normal for society, right? Like, we are still going to have to mask. We are still going to have to make sure that we have a certain amount of social distancing. So definitely agree with you.
And you're absolutely right. Just last remark, we're going to continue to need social distancing for years to come. So it's something we can all get used to. Vaccine is not, for lack of a better metaphor, a silver bullet. But it's still interesting for us to know. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lewis. Delegate Ambrose?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Santelises, for all the information and all your hard work. I have two quick questions as it relates to instruction. The first question I have is there any other metric that is being used to assess student success other than grades? I know that grades are being the primary thing that we're using here, but are there any other metrics that you are to use to assess that? And then the second question that I have is, what is one of my concerns that I've heard from parents is, as has been expressed, is some students are doing well at home. And my worry is that will there be a decline if teachers are having to toggle between students in the classroom and conducting virtual learning, or if a teacher is doing a great job virtual learning and they're taking away from virtual learning to be in the classroom. I just want to understand, like, what are the measures you all going to put in place to maintain a high level of instruction at the same time?
No, thank you, Delegate. And those are also really important and thoughtful questions. So on the first, with regards to assessing learning loss, we absolutely are looking at measures beyond just grades. Grades are an important indicator, but they're not the only. So we, for example, still had our beginning of year formative assessments. So we did amplify and iReady testing, techniques that you don't necessarily need to know the details to, but actually formative assessments that let us know where students are in a certain level of reading skills and math skills, particularly in the grades K-8 level. But actually, we've done some in the upper grades as well. So that's one indicator. I think the other piece that we are seeing that actually matches what we are seeing in the grades is the very increased level of chronic absenteeism. So when we track absenteeism, actually we weren't waiting for any school reopening to begin that, because we saw, like, again, many urban school districts, many school districts that are serving the same populations of children were experiencing some of the same data points that we were seeing. So chronic absenteeism, students that are missing 5+ days of school in a month. Those are the things that we've been tracking. And we've actually been working with some of our community-based organizations to find kids, right? So we've instituted, particularly for kids that are chronically absent, individual calls, not just at the school level, but the central level, to be able to track and outreach. So chronic absenteeism has been a big one. And then I would say some of the other figures that we will always use is just performance in class. So a great example of that, and we know that some of the formative work and observation that teachers see in class assignments are some of the best indicators. So real example, an ESOL teacher who was part of a group of teachers I was speaking with about reentry said, very bluntly, she has half of her students virtual. She used to have all of her students virtual, half returned. And she is tracking that the students in person, particularly her ESOL students who are in person, are probably 3 to 4 months ahead of the students when they were virtual and the students that are remaining virtual. So for her, there's certain populations of students for whom teachers themselves are seeing the difference. They're seeing the difference in affect. So those are other indicators, but the advantage of technology, and I do want to say, because the delegation, the city have been great in really advocating for broadband and for technology investment. I think a plus to come out of this is that we have far more interventions and the ability to track students' progress academically, given some of the new technological tools that we can use now that we have far greater student access to technology than we had prior to March 2020. So that is a benefit. I was actually talking to Superintendent Goldson and Prince George's this morning, and we were talking about, again, a virtual early literacy program that they are seeing great success with. And again, the virtual environment enables us to be able to track and to intervene faster. It's not working for all kids. That's the challenge. And then on the dual instruction, that's a rub. And I will just say that it's a challenge. And one of the reasons why we are working to provide models to schools so that they can have adaptations that fit their school community. So if you are a school with 800 students, what you can do looks very different from compared to a school that has 300 students. And so matter of fact, I've received from a teacher 5 or 6 models that their school team is working on with regards to the synchronous and asynchronous, I shouldn't say in-person and virtual dual challenge. I have been in classrooms with teachers doing both who have given me great feedback about these are the tools that would really help me be more effective with both. So one of the investments we're making in our CARES dollars that we heard from a number of teachers was having another adult in the classroom to help monitor where students are in the virtual environment is opening up a number of areas for us. So for example, in one school, it looks like stipending parents, right, to help in just kind of the technical maneuvering that requires going back and forth. In other classrooms, it might mean additional paraprofessionals. We've had some folks from Central, but this is just one example of feedback from teachers who are doing it now, who are saying these are some of the things that would help us better navigate what, yes, is absolutely a challenging situation.
Thank you so much. Delegate Bridges.
Yep, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Santelises, for the presentation. Just a question from what you mentioned earlier with the mental health concerns that you had with the students. I mean, I get it, especially with students being home and isolated and not being around their other friends and students. It can be really tough, more so on them than it is even for us parents. And so I know that, although we're having challenges and we're starting to see rise in suicides, especially among Latinx and African American students, are there any measures in place to assist with those mental health challenges from the school system, or is there a partnership that you have with the health department, or is there anything that we can do to assist with you, the resources you need for those mental health challenges?
No, thank you, Delegate Bridges, because it absolutely is an area that we're focused on, not only now, but when we talk about reentry at any time or level. We know, we have principals who are saying, Dr. S, we're just going to have to reorient kids to what it looks like to do school, right? I mean, just at a very fundamental level. I will say our community partners have been fabulous during this time, and give a shout out, frankly, to the delegation, because the additional dollars for concentration of poverty and community schools coordinators has been invaluable during this period. So community school coordinators have been invaluable in not only kind of identifying larger family challenges that are impacting student engagement, but then going and connecting those families to resources, right? Because housing instability doesn't, it's not your early reading score, right? But it is impacting students. And so the investment that this delegation advocated for at the state level, that we are benefiting from now with community school coordinators, has really helped with those connections. What we are hearing is that in large part, the mental health concerns when students return. I had a conversation with Mayor Scott, and we're going to be, he's going to be convening some discussions between the school system, the police commissioner, and others, because we know we are going to have a spike in identified child abuse, because teachers are among the most effective reporters of child abuse, and that has effectively been almost shut down or severely reduced during this time. And so the mayor and I had a conversation, and I think, he's using his convening power, which is a powerful tool, to say, let's get ahead of this, right? Let's get out in front, because we know we're going to have a spike in cases. And so how do we make sure that we have not just how do we identify the crime of child abuse, but how do we have the mental health connections in place that once children and families are identified, that we're going to need a real additional investment in making sure that we have that. And then I would finally say, we know that we have schools where we have larger concentrations of students that have not connected. So Chief High Cupboard and I, we have a relationship with North Bay Outdoor Education Center. And one of the things we, we're just at the beginning of discussing is knowing that for young people who really have been, checked out for long periods of time. When I spoke to young people who are up at North Bay last week, one of the things they talked about was how it was a great recentering experience, right? To come together collectively, have that time to just, again, develop the relationships and get that kind of affirmation. And a number of those students are homeless. And what we've heard is that it has provided an anchor at a time when families are really under even more increased duress. So we are exploring with North Bay, is there a way to identify some of our most severely impacted students during this closure period for that type of experience in terms of reentry. So those are some of the things, and some of the ways, frankly, that the delegation's past work is now bearing fruit. And I think some of the things we need to look to as we move forward on the social emotional need that I'm glad you rightly identified.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Clippinger.
Good morning, Dr. Santelises. Thank you for everything that you're doing in a very challenging time. I have a question, and I feel like as I've been listening, you've kind of sort of touched on the broader issue, but you certainly talked about the kids who were failing and who were showing up years behind in well, I shouldn't say that exactly that way, but the kids that were further behind. One of the questions, we seem to be, doing things creatively during this time. I'm wondering, and I genuinely don't know the impact for anything about this, but I had a constituent raise this as one potential way forward that would at least seek to identify kids who had kind of fallen by the wayside because of what's going on in COVID. Is it possible to, as opposed to, at least right now, as opposed to failing a student, it's possible to say that they are an incomplete, and to provide some kind of some sort of flag to say, okay, here's where they have fallen behind in these areas. I am not a teacher. I'm a simple country lawyer, I guess. But I don't. So I don't know the logistical problems. I don't know, what would be involved with that. But could you give us maybe that distinction between failing a student right now who maybe has major problems going on because of COVID, as opposed to just giving them as an incomplete and somehow folding them back into learning down the line?
No, and it's a great question, Delegate, and one I think that's being asked nationwide, and one that we actually addressed or had to address this past spring. And so part of what we've tried to do is, at least initially, and we're looking at what some of the implications are of that. But, initially we had a code for students who just didn't have technology, didn't have, so which is different than just I failed my course, right? So that's one thing. So we've been trying to code that. I think the other piece that we've tried to do, and I will say admittedly, one of my own children has benefited from this, and that is just some additional grace, right, at the teacher level, right? So not everything has to be legislated, in terms of policy. There's flexibility, and I don't think it's just because she's the CEO's kid. They get their grades like everybody else. But I think what we've also tried to stress, and some schools are great examples of this, of where you give grace for a deadline, right, within particular course, subject, or topic. And so we've been trying to work and signal that. Again, some schools are better than that at others, admittedly, right? That there's variance. And so I think where we are now, as we review, we're doing similar analysis right now around our second quarter grade. So we'll be doing that shortly to say, okay, has there been any improvement? Because between first quarter and second quarter, we did put in some interventions. So first, the question is, did we actually gain ground on that? And then two, we did use an incomplete designation at the end of spring last year. And so some of the things that we're exploring is, do we have a institute a pass-fail option for some students at some point for at least a course or two? That's a possibility. Do we to your point, reinstitute the incomplete? I will tell you very forthrightly, though, the balance is what we also heard from young people, particularly high school students, was as soon as you told me it didn't count, I checked out. And so we're balancing, right, the need to do both, to incentivize, reward, but to have the right amount of grace. And then what are the systems and structures that are built in at the classroom level, the school level, and the district level to be able to do that? And admittedly, it is a balancing act. Like, we had really positive feedback from a number of families, who said to us back in September, I feel like my child's back in school again. I feel like they're actually going to class daily. I feel like they actually have a substantive amount of work to complete. And so we don't want to back off of that, but we do want to be able to, for lack of a better term, create reasonable grace, right? Like, how do you do that? And, again, as a mom, I have a child who's been the beneficiary of some of that. Like, okay, we get you checked out on Friday. Can you get it to me on Monday? Right? You're missing your laptop. How do we flag that to get you another one? Right. And so that it doesn't result in failure. But I think what it does allow us to do and see is just what the impact has been, right? All things being, where we are, those are significant declines. And, I know from my work at the post-secondary level in college, like, grades are actually a better indicator of student learning than some aspects of the SAT. So, at some point we've got to actually face that for young people, for a good number of young people, this space isn't working. And I will just add, we have families who are like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Are you going to have a virtual option moving forward, right? We feel freer as a family, and I want to be honest, we feel freer as a family. We have more family time. We can do this and that. We actually want a virtual option. And so those families will continue to have that option. But this is about, how are we making some of those adjustments that you're talking about?
Thank you. Delegate Lehrman?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, Dr. Santelises. You've covered a lot of ground this morning. So I just wanted to, in the chat, I asked something and I wanted to make sure everybody heard about this. So my understanding is that Baltimore City Public Schools is going to be the recipient of $197 million from the federal government, which, I will be honest, I almost started crying in my car when I heard it on the news yesterday. Obviously, we face huge challenges for our kids. We're going to need tutoring and other things to make up some of the time they've lost. Our school buildings, as we have talked about today, need a lot of work. So, I think we are all so excited about this funding, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to have a response and to let us know that you will at some point be presenting a fuller plan on how you'll be using those funds, and hopefully they will go a long way towards addressing some of the challenges in a long-term way. So thank you.
No, thank you. And I'm sure this was part of it, that's 4 times what we received last year. So that is significant. I think numerous people on this call have a heightened sense of hopefulness with the new administration and their commitment to supporting safe reopening of schools. And one of the things, I was talking to a national reporter yesterday, and one of the things that I hope to see is actually a national discussion about what are the best practices in recovery, right? We know some of this. And so how do we target those resources in ways that we know are high leverage, and what quality implementation looks like? So these are conversations right now that I'm having with superintendent colleagues across the country, but I think we actually benefit from a national conversation, a state conversation about that. I think some of what Delegate Bridges referenced earlier about the social emotional learning needs, that it's not just about the academic piece. We have kids who are going to need to reconnect. And, we're going to have to give teachers grace to be able to build that back, that it's not all about get your Amplify data, in right on time, but some of it is just, I had a teacher who is who actually does want to come back, who said to me, like, there are students I need to lay eyes on, that I just need to be able to do that. But then the question becomes, how do we support that teacher, right, in actually being able to support that young person? Because it's not just about being back in buildings. Like, let's be clear. Like, it's, we had a long row to hoe before the pandemic. And I have been very outspoken about the fact that, let's not act like this is a crisis that just descended upon us and everything was honky-dory before. I think a lot of the great push has come from me, from principals and teachers, or questions about how do we now do things differently? How do we use the investment in technology? How do we use flexible time? We have school students who we will not get back because they are working. They have worked. They are telling us, as a matter of fact, the mayor and I were having conversations within 1 week. Both of us had conversations with young people who were very respectful, but very direct in saying, I now have a job. My family needs the job. And so I don't really know if I'm thinking about coming back. Well, this is the opportunity to use some of this funding to come up with those creative solutions around young people and work. And how do we have now, with technology, more flexible hybrid options for young people who don't see it as a false choice between do I work or do I go to school? Because that is what I would call a Sophie's choice. Like they should not have to make that decision. And so what are new structures around that? Another great piece of news, we had our second cohort of Eager Street Academy students. These are our incarcerated youth who, through this pandemic and through the leadership of our college and career readiness team, the first cohort went through, and they had, joint, sorry, my husband just walked in. They had joint, so he threw me off. They had joint collaboration and enrollment at the University of Baltimore, right? And so these are young people who we did not serve well throughout a majority of their time in city schools, who over the course of the last year, because of creative approaches that have come up through this pandemic, they now went through their second round of Baltimore, University of Baltimore courses with A's and B's and a couple of C's thrown in. Now, these are young people who had failed out, who were in criminal behavior. And so one of the things we're looking at is, well, wait a minute, we did this as a result, we accelerated this as a result of the pandemic. How do we now raise those best practices and use that money to do that? So yes, the tutoring, we have more community tutoring, we have more Baltimore City college students who look like our young people, who came from where they came, who are now tutoring. And a lot of what we're hearing from our students is those relationships are as much about mentoring as they are about anything else, and their ability to connect. So these are some, just briefly, of things that I think are locally generative that will be able to use some of this money to apply to those creative solutions, as well as things like, paying tutors and looking at extended day and school year. But extended day and school year, and I'll note it since I'm with the delegation, is incredibly expensive. And I think one of my colleagues, it might have been actually CEO Goldson in Prince George's, has already done, and I told her she's got to send me the notes, has already done the calculation of what every day of an extended school year costs. And so I think what we're going to have to, also manage is, what interventions we can implement with what money. But, anytime you receive 4 times more what you received previously, it is good news. And we are working to be very deliberate and strategic and not just kind of treat it as great, we got more money in. But so I look forward to reporting back to the delegation about our plans around that. Sorry, that was long, but that's the fun stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I actually had a question / statement, and it's unnerving how often you're somehow walking around my mind, Dr. Santelises, with what I wanted to mention, because it was about the seniors in high school, and maybe some that aren't quite seniors that are working, and I've made a decision that they have to do something. One of the things that I don't often hear brought up from many different voices is the fact that the access to telework is very, very low for Black and Hispanic workers in general. Less than 1 in 5 Black workers is eligible, has a work from home eligible job, and roughly 1 in 6 Hispanic workers. So when we're talking about this, I think that's sometimes being missed because many of the households that comprise, the student base for Baltimore City Public Schools, they are not in that number in many instances. So I think that grounding is important because I am very aware that the people that have the most access to me are breathing rare air. They may not be rich, but they're able to sit on this Facebook Live and look at me right now. And they're able to engage with me in a certain way. And for me, the words like equity are loaded, they're important, and they're critically, like they should not be overlooked. But in many ways, the child I am most concerned about, I do not know their parent or guardian, and their parent or guardian probably doesn't know how to even reach me or who I am. And I think that part of this conversation is being missed a lot because you don't have to be wealthy to be privileged in this conversation because you're engaging on a Wi-Fi medium, whatever your feelings are. But there's a whole range of households in our system that right now, if they are blessed enough to have a job, is probably outside of the house every single day. And I imagine since March, everyone within my scope of hearing has probably gone to a grocery store. Since March, everyone in my scope of hearing has probably entered a convenience store, a pharmacy. Everyone within my scope of hearing has been rejoicing that now someone is picking up their recycling. Those are people who do not have a choice to leave their home every single day. And if they did not leave their house every single day, I can assure you there would be an eruption so profoundly loud from every corridor, we couldn't even imagine it. So I just want to make sure we're centering when we're using the words like equity, we're using these words about care, that there's a whole world of people that are not in this paradigm we're all in together right now. And they are the families that we're serving and talking about the most, but yet they're not the voices that have the time to talk to us. So I just need to get that off my chest because those people see a lot of people every single day with a plastic shield as their armor. And they see hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. And I get emotional when I think about it because they have no choice. They have to put food on the table. So I just want us to think about that. All of us and all those within my scope of hearing, think about what we're saying and what our fears mean and what that means to other people who don't have permission to fear because they gotta go.
Yes.
So that's all I have to say. Are there any other questions?
Can I record that, Delegate Smith?
It's recorded on Facebook Live.
Wonderful. So we'll take that because and just so that you know, those are the parents who we are seeing come back. Those are the parents who are saying, you being open means that I can go to work and not worry about what is going on with my child. And those are the parents I'm talking to. And I'm not talking to them through a Zoom. I'm out in a school. Those are the parents that are coming, and those are the parents that deserve a voice. So I'm going to take your recording. We'll probably put it in staff meetings because I could not have said it any better, and I could not agree more. But that, just FYI, those are the parents I'm talking to. And they're not the ones who provide editorials or anything else because they got to go to work.
Understood. Well, I conferred with my counsel. There needs to be a motion to conclude our hearing. Do we have one?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. This meeting, the first, but not the last of the Baltimore City delegation for the 2021 session has concluded. Thank you.
Thank you.
For having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.